You can find him on Twitter at Schatz NFL, founder of Football Outsiders, creator of DVOA. He's an AP All-Pro and MVP voter. He's an NFL analytics expert and author of the FTN Football Almanac 2023. Aaron Schatz joining us here on the Get Right. Aaron, what's going on?
Hey, I'm doing well, man. Life is good. We're finishing up the book. We're getting ready for the season. Everything's good.
Aaron, super excited to talk to you because I've long appreciated your work. And I need some help, which I'm sure you've been asked a ton of times because I love referencing DVOA, but always it's a struggle. It's a struggle, as I'm sure you might imagine, to fully explain. Can you help me? How is the way that I should explain DVOA to folks who are uninitiated?
The super short version is that it measures success on every play compared to a baseline that's adjusted for situation and opponent.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna take that audio. I'm gonna clip it. I'm gonna put it on my phone. And when anybody asks me, I'm just playing that.
We're gonna play that back.
I'm fascinated by that, and I guess we'll get into a lot of analytic things. In fact, including the running back situation that has popped off. But I've been fascinated with how did you get to this place? Because obviously, the idea is very novel or noble. I guess the idea of let's see if we can get something that's a baseline across the board. But how do you get there in trying to figure out DVOA?
It started out with a book called The Hidden Game of Football that came out in the late 80s. And the idea of success points on every play. So it came up, they had the idea that, getting 40% of the yardage was worth 1 point and 60% was worth 2 points. And then I put that together and then I was like, but you have to compare it to a baseline because otherwise you'd end up with fullbacks as the most valuable players in football because when they carry the ball, it's usually on the goal line and they score a touchdown and it's very valuable, but almost anybody would score on, first and goal from the one, right? So you had to use a baseline and then adjust for opponent because every team plays a different schedule. And that's how I came up with DVOA. Been doing it for 20 years now.
Yeah, I was like, don't tell Pete Carroll about scoring on the one, but that's neither here nor there.
That's neither here nor there at this point. Shout out to Marshawn Lynch. Aaron, as we look at today's analytics and the way that it has affected the game and your work and what you've done over the course of now 2 decades, how has analytics changed the game based on the way that you have studied the game and what it means for how teams utilize the information that comes from analytics now?
It's definitely changed the way coaches coach in games, especially over the last 6 years since the Eagles won the Super Bowl, right? Teams go for it on 4th down, not as much as analytics says that they should, but much more than they used to. They pass more than they used to. They run more play action. They run more motion. All these things that analytics tell us are very good have become more popular. It's also really affected the way teams construct their rosters. And you talked about the running back situation, right? I mean, the fact is, teams are more cognizant now of what the value of certain positions is. And we know that certain positions, it's harder to find good players than at other positions. And therefore, you have to pay a premium for the best players at a position like quarterback or wide receiver or offensive tackle, as opposed to a position where it's easy to find a talented player like running back.
And let's stick with that because we have seen Tony Pollard, Josh Jacobs, Saquon Barkley not receive long-term contracts from their respective teams. And there have been some folks within the football community who have looked to analytics as partly to blame for the quote-unquote devaluing of the running back, if you will, based off of the way that teams are utilizing their running backs and what they could get for production based off of someone else playing that same position at a lower cost. What would you say to individuals who would criticize analytics for the way that the running back position is either viewed or is changed based off of that information?
Yep, we're to blame. I mean, I'm not hiding from it. We're to blame because we're right, and because teams realize that we're right. There's 2 things going on here. The first is that running is less important in the modern game of football than it used to be. Passing, teams realize passing is just much more efficient than running, and therefore you've got to put more money in your pass offense and your pass defense than your run offense and your run defense. The other thing that's going on is There are a lot of talented running backs out there. This isn't about the idea that best running backs are not great athletes and hard workers. This is about the fact that there's lots of guys that are great athletes and hard workers, which is why you keep having guys from the 5th and 6th and 7th rounds. All of a sudden, Isaiah Pacheco and Tyler Algier are playing great. We know that the running game is driven more by the offensive line than people tended to think in the past, right? The running back was always the star, but the offensive line is, moves the block, moves the defense. So there's so many reasons why running backs have been devalued. Here's the good news. The good news is that money that used to go to running backs did not disappear. It goes to other players at other positions. So it's not like analytics people don't think football players should be paid. We just think more money should be going to cornerbacks or pass rushers.
We're talking to Aaron Schatz. He's an NFL analytics expert and the author of the FTN Football Almanac. Go ahead and check that out because it's always very helpful and very useful. Kind of pursuant to the running backs conversation, but not exactly about it. One thing I think about a lot is just obviously when it comes to anything statistical, the more that you stick to what I guess is supposed to be the right answer, the more likely you fall into that, preferable outcome. But like, how do you balance that with kind of the nature of football and I guess the common thought process that eventually, sometimes there are times where you need to zig as opposed to zagging, kind of having the outlier situation. Do you kind of subscribe to the idea that always stick to what should work, or how do you balance that, the idea of maybe sometimes going away from what the numbers would suggest?
No, sometimes you have to zig. It's a chess game, man. You got to like I said, passing is always more efficient than running. But it doesn't mean you stop running entirely, right? Like somewhere there is a happy medium between passing and rushing. We just haven't reached that ratio yet. But, absolutely. The fact is that you need to switch things up a little bit. Like if you're really good from 12 personnel, you still have to run some other personnel groups sometimes just to switch up what the defense does. And if you're really good passing, you still want to run sometimes just to make sure that the defense respects the play fake. Like that's part of the chess game of football.
So, Aaron, one of the things, obviously, that you're very familiar with and you've kind of alluded to in this conversation is just kind of the negative connotation that comes with the word analytics. What is like maybe one thing that you would want to say to folks that kind of have a negative view of analytics?
Yeah, it's just about studying data to figure out how to win more games. We're all out here trying to win more games, or for those of us who are in the media, we're trying to be more accurate in what we say about teams. And it's just, using data. Everybody uses data and their eyes when they judge football players. What we're doing in analytics is improving the data part of that. So you're not just depending on yardage totals, but you're depending on stats that are adjusted for context. It doesn't mean we stop using our eyes. It doesn't mean we stop scouting, but it means that the stats part of what we do is much better than it used to be.
Speaking of that information, now in its 19th season, your FTN Football Almanac 2023, gold standard when it comes to preseason NFL previews, and one of the favorites in this year's version, the Dallas Cowboys, projected to have the most wins with 11, followed by San Francisco, Kansas City, and Buffalo. What are the numbers telling you going into the season about Dallas and why they are projected, based on what we see here, to have 11 wins given this tough schedule that they're going to be playing this year?
Yeah, Dallas, their schedule is not that tough. It's pretty average. The fact is this is a really good all-around team, right? They're strong on offense. They're strong on defense. They've been strong on offense and defense for a couple years now, so you've got a track record. People tend to overestimate the importance of the playoffs when it comes to projecting future performance, right? The fact is, for all regular season, for 2 straight regular seasons, Dallas has been a really good team. So don't look at the fact that they fell on their faces in the playoffs each year and go, well, now they're just an average team because they played badly in 1 game, because you learn more from 17 games than you do from 2.
Aaron, what's a commonly misunderstood thing about analytics? Like maybe folks who are not like the smartest in analytics, but like diving in. What's the thing that you see kind of most misunderstood in this space?
Oh, it's tough. I mean, I think sometimes people take the stuff about running backs not mattering too seriously. Like, there is a difference between good and bad running backs. Like, it's not as big as people think it is, but it does exist. It's just there are better stats than just yards per carry that tell us, like, what a running back is doing separate from his offensive line.
So my partner here, KG, was talking about the almanac, and obviously you go through great lengths to put it together. What's like something that's kind of caught your attention, that's kind of bounced around in your head in preparing this year's version of the almanac?
Well, I think the biggest surprise people are going to find in the almanac is how much we like Atlanta and New Orleans this year. And that's because Atlanta and New Orleans are going to be surprisingly average. Like, everybody thinks that every team in the NFC South is just a black hole of death. But the fact is, there's lots of reasons to believe that Atlanta and New Orleans can be average. And they have the two easiest schedules in the league by far. Like, I would not be shocked. If our projections all came out true, which of course they never do, let's be honest. But, if they did, we would have both those teams in the playoffs because their schedules are so easy. Wow.
That's fascinating because we look at the NFC South, and for me, at least based off of just the raw numbers and what you're looking at roster-wise, you feel like New Orleans would be the best team in that division, and that the only team coming out of that division would be the New Orleans Saints going to the playoffs. But that would be interesting if Atlanta, especially with their quarterback situation with Desmond Ridder, are able to find themselves into the playoffs this year.
Their defense should be much improved over last year. They added a lot of talent. There's a lot of reason to believe that Atlanta can put together one of the top dozen defenses in the league, which would be a big improvement.
Fun question before we let you go, because we love talking about just the NFL and NFL itself, but obviously the best player in the league is Patrick Mahomes, and of course the Kansas City Chiefs, one of the top teams in terms of DVOA as well. How fun is it just looking at the numbers when it comes to the Chiefs, particularly their offense, when it comes to Patrick Mahomes and what they do on a week-to-week basis?
Oh, my God. I mean, the dude's a legend. I mean, the fact is, if he continues at this pace, he'll be the best player ever. But there's no guarantee. It's only been 5 or 6 years of this. Like, let's see him do it for 20. But like, how good he is now, I don't know if there's ever been a quarterback who was as good at his peak as what Mahomes has been for the last 4 or 5 years.
It'll be fun to watch that offense this year in terms of the AFC West with all they've got going on there. And then, according to your almanac as well, the AFC East projected to have the hardest schedule this year in the National Football League, of course, with Aaron Rodgers joining the AFC East as a part of the New York Jets. Aaron, tell the folks so they can find you and the work that you're doing, and a little bit more about the Football Almanac this year. Yeah,
so this is the book that was previously known as Football Outsiders Almanac. It's now the FTN Football Almanac. You can find out more by going to ftnfantasy.com. Look for the picture of Mahomes down on the right side of the page. The book is $29.99 on an early bird special for the next week. Then it's $34.99 after that. We're shooting to come out on August 7th, but I'm hoping to come out a little earlier. We'll have chapters on all 32 teams, all our advanced stats, projections for all the fantasy players, odds of every team winning the Super Bowl, odds of getting the number 1 pick in next year's draft. And yes, we like the Dallas Cowboys a lot.
Oh, well, if that's the case, we'd love to talk to you again here soon, Aaron.
That's right.
Like that's a great thing to hear.
Yeah, I mean, we think they're going to be good this year, man. So if you're a Dallas fan and you want to read happy things about your team, you need to buy our book.
Well, we appreciate the time with you joining us here on the Get Right. You can find him on Twitter at @AShotsNFL. Aaron Schatz, good enough to join us here on 105 to the Fan. Aaron, thank you so much for the time. This was great. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on the show, guys.